again. I'm Alister McGrath and I'm a Christian theologian at Oxford University. I'm talking about the surprising relevance and appeal of Christianity, especially at a personal level. And it's really interesting. Christianity is 2,000 years old, so surely it needs to be discarded as being out of date. Yet many of the intellectual fashions of our own day seem to last only a few years before they're displaced by something else that turns out to be equally transient. People are looking for something that will last, that in effect it's something that can be trusted on to see you through life and not simply through a little phase of that life. So how do we account for the success of Christianity? Well, critics of Christianity will tell us it's simply a wish fulfillment, something we create to comfort ourselves. It's a kind of self-medication or placebo, a spiritual drug that dulls our minds to the despair and pointlessness of life. But I think this is a very important objection, so I'd like to talk it through with you. Let's look at this idea that religious belief is a construct of the human mind that's been invented or created to shield ourselves from a world devoid of meaning and personal significance. As I'm sure you know, Sigmund Freud argued that inadequate people are drawn to faith to help them cope with a bleak and meaningless universe. And Freud certainly saw the creation of God as a human invention, a human delusion, in which our desire for what ought to be the case triumphs over what really is the case. In other words, desire triumphs over truth. Now, this is often presented in some popular atheist writings as a kind of scientific certainty, but it's not, you see. It's nothing more than a very interesting hypothesis, which unfortunately hasn't really stood the test of time. There's a much deeper truth about human nature that we really do need to face up to here, and that is that we are extremely good at deluding ourselves. We allow our desires to shape our vision of reality. We want to create a reality that aligns with our desires or our aspirations. We're all prone to inventing an imaginary world that chimes in with our desires, and then, almost like an afterthought, developing arguments to validate it. And certainly, when I was an atheist myself, I remember often thinking, maybe I'm just making this up because this is the way I'd like things to be. It really irritate my religious friends. It wasn't really very well evidenced. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt points out, using what I think is a very vivid metaphor, that our emotional dog all too often wags our rational tail. In other words, we allow our emotions to determine our beliefs. And Haidt's point as a psychologist is that the evidence very often suggests that people reach conclusions based on intuition or emotions, and then later construct some kind of intellectual arguments offering justifications for those beliefs. In other words, we often decide what we want to be true and then figure out some kind of rational justification for our beliefs. But listen, it's not just religious people who might be into wish fulfillment. Atheists might be as well. The argument cuts both ways. It's part of the human condition, and we need to be very honest about this. The philosopher Thomas Nagel, who I've read a lot and actually I find really interesting, is an atheist, and he concedes this point about, wish fulfillment when discussing the origins and grounds of his own atheism. Because for Nagel, his own atheism was a post hoc rationalization of his desire for a godless universe. So listen to what Nagel has to say and see what you think. He writes, "I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." Do you see the line of reasoning that's going on here? You decide what you want reality to be like, and then develop all sorts of sophisticated arguments to convince yourself that's the way the universe really is. And we see the same thing with the well-known biologist Aldous Huxley, who wrote the bestseller Brave New World many years ago. And Huxley made it very clear he rejected belief in God for reasons that actually had very little to do with science or reason. Here's what he said. "I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning, consequently assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption." Now, do you see the underlying pattern of reasoning here? Huxley didn't want the universe to have any meaning, so he invented arguments to justify his desire that the world would be meaningless and godless. And I could add myself to this list of people who didn't want God to exist, because back when I was an atheist myself in the late 1960s, I saw God as a threat to my freedom. I did not want there to be a God, because if there is no God, then I could do what I liked, rather than feeling I had to act in accordance with some higher or better good that I didn't choose or create. And so I saw atheism as being liberating. It allowed me to make myself the center of my moral universe. So naturally I saw God as a wish-fulfilment, a kind of belief that inadequate people invented to give them a spurious sense of meaning and purpose in life. And I prided myself on only believing what could be proved to be true, and so I saw this as a way of dismissing the idea of God. But as you can see, there is a big problem with my position. What if my atheism was simply the result of my desire for complete freedom and unaccountability? Might my atheism have been a wish fulfillment? That's what I think I have to say. I would now say, looking back on the development of my life. But I'm not the only person to argue like this. Referencing Karl Marx's very famous declaration that religion is the opium of the people, the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz wrote these words, which I think are highly perceptive, and I quote them. A true opium for the people is a belief in nothingness after death, the huge solace of thinking that for our betrayals, greed, cowardice, and murders, we are not going to be judged. I wonder if you can see what he's getting at. The human desire for unaccountability leads to the metaphysical conclusion there is no God. If there is a God, we're accountable, and many find that a very unsettling and unbearable thought. For Miłosz, the rise of postmodernism led to the denial of any notion of objective truth. In other words, we just make things up. We believe fake truths because these tell us what we want to hear. And real truth is very often rather uncomfortable. Maybe I'm entirely on my own here, but I don't think I could live on the basis of what I knew to be an invented truth, made up to suit the cultural mood. And one of the reasons for the resurgence of interest in Christianity is that it's a tried and tested response to a greater reality, which we call God. It's a vision of the world that makes sense of who we really are and helps us discover, not invent, significance and meaning in life, because Christianity aligns us with the deepest truths of our universe. Now, the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein made this point. He argued that we find meaning when we think and live in accordance with something that is deeper and greater than we are. And I'm going to dig deeper into this idea in the next episode, when I'm going to explore the Christian way of understanding faith or belief. So I look forward to speaking with you again very soon.